today's author is a leadership and mindfulness coach. He's an integral part of ISKCON and a director at the Eco Govardhan Village. But he's not called me up until now even once. So I'm going to take that up with him a little later. But he's also on the board of the School of Public Leadership. And in difficult times such as these, he's basically written a book which I think would make a lot of sense for all of us to read. It's called The Art of Resilience. Welcome to IIM's author series, Gaurang Prabhuji.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me. And, this is something which I was able to produce during the COVID, taken totally by surprise last year by the lockdown. And I thought this may be a very useful contribution during this period.
In unprecedented times such as these, we need books such as these in order to navigate, because not everybody can meditate for 2 hours or 3 hours or 12 hours like you do. So, but let me start with the very first question. What got you to write this book? What was the reason behind writing this book?
Yeah, actually, in today's day and age, as we see the tremendous amount of instability which has happened because of COVID, the way people have been affected is something mind-boggling. Approximately $1 trillion worth of global economic losses people are seeing, and mental health disturbance are contributing to almost 25% of years lived with instability in this world. And globally, depression has become such a leading factor of disability, affecting more than 300 million people. And 1 in 12, and that was an unbelievable figure, 1 in 12, which is almost 19 million adults, they are reporting a substance abuse disorder. And almost 9 million adults are living with various kinds of mental illnesses. So as far as suicides are concerned, India being such a young nation, but I was shocked to hear that around 370 suicides happen every single day. And therefore, every 40 seconds globally, someone is dying because of suicide. So with all of the technology, with all the improvement, with all of the amazing global economy which is growing overall, if we have not been able to deal with the mental health challenges, that would be extremely important to deal with. And therefore, I thought of few reasons why resilience is important, because number one, it helps people pursue meaningful goals. Second, it helps challenge assumptions, because resilience requires creativity, it requires flexibility, because traditional beliefs should be examined in the light of new experiences and ideas. The pandemic is one great example. Reason number three is the resilience helps increase your cognitive flexibility, because in today's day and age, you have to be able to respond to stress, irrespective of what may be the situation, and your intelligence must be able to function. If you're not cognitively flexible, you can't function. And number four is typically in all our wisdom scriptures of the Vedas, resilience is shown as the art of growth through suffering. Either you read Ramayana or you read Mahabharata and you read all of these texts, it's always some kind of crisis happening, but still the growth is happening along with that. And reason number five is there is an all-time high fear everywhere. And so resilience helps to act in such times of fear, because positive psychology is extremely important, and courage helps you to deal with such situations. And number six is that when people are getting locked down and they are not having a life the way they are used to, then you need more and more emotional intelligence. And resilience helps build such emotional intelligence. And most importantly, resilience leads to actually seeking social support. Resilient individuals have the humility, have the strength to actually draw from their social networks, and they are willing to say that, yes, I need help, I need some support and things like that. And they're also the ones who are willing to provide support to others. So these times are really very unprecedented, and I thought that presented in a story format, this would really help.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have Gaur Gopal Das ji. Namaskar. So very nice to see you. He's in the comment section. He's writing, saying you articulated it really well.
Thank you, Gaur Gopal Prabhu. Thank you so much for joining.
No, but and what you said, the 6 points that you mentioned, and the fact that you've written this is, of course, for the greater good. But let me ask you this: that because this is the common misconception or the common understanding for a lot of people these days, the concept of motivational speakers or life coaches. Um, People think that this is a very, it's a fancy way to earn quick money. And with no disrespect to what you are doing, I think it's phenomenal what you have been doing, what Gaur Gopal Das ji does. But I've seen Instagram Instagram motivational speakers saying these are the 3 life hacks that you should have, you should do. uh, Everyone is a life coach on Instagram. Don't you think that this concept of life coaches, motivational speakers, or gurus essentially is something that is being, is in a way, for the 21st century, something that is affecting people in, certain people are utilizing that in a negative way, and therefore spoiling the entire, the name of the fraternity of people who are wanting to do good?
Well, Rishabh, thank you very much for asking that question. I come from a very optimistic perspective on this. When I see that every single second, 30,000 users are watching pornography, $3,000 are being spent every second on pornography, and so many other negative things are spreading the internet space. So if some people have the intention, genuine intention to make a difference positively in people's lives, so I think let us at least applaud and
Of course,
appreciate that intention.
of course.
So, that's my opening remark on this. Following up on that, I would say that when Arjuna was on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Arjuna background was like he was the most successful warrior who had never lost ever before. He was a gold medalist from Dronacharya's institute. He had everything going for him in his life. So in spite of all of those successes, when he just saw a little change in circumstance in form of Bhishma, who was his grandfather, and Drona, his teacher, right in front of him, he just became nervous, and he just felt, as a warrior, I should fight. As a grandson, I should love. As a student, I should respect. So I'm going through an identity crisis. Am I a warrior? Am I a student? Am I a grandson? And that paralyzed him. And he became so demotivated. He had the skill to fight, but he lost the will to fight. And so the Gita was spoken by Krishna to Arjuna at that moment, specifically to give him that will to fight. That in fact, the entire 700 verses of Bhagavad Gita is nothing but a philosophy to motivate Arjuna to regain his skill, because Arjuna had his skill, but he lost his will. So I would say that, Bhagavad Gita is one of the most authentic, original literatures on motivation. And, I really feel that anyone who gets inspired or connected in whatever way, would be definitely helping society.
So you're saying take the positive even out of the influencers on Instagram who are essentially, who don't know much, but out there trying to infuse positivity in some way. Am I correct in understanding that?
Yeah, I would say that those who are infusing positivity but don't know the full range of how to do that, at least they may come across others in that spectrum, and then जैसे कहते हैं ना, संग से परिवर्तन होगा. So then somehow or the other they'll connect with someone who has a better perspective and better idea and more authentic solution, and maybe they'll latch up to it and they'll take up to it. But at least they are moving in that space, that domain of trying to help. So sooner or later they'll come across someone who will take them to the next level. That's my hope.
So it's basically like how we came into, how we met you, just like that. Always hope. That's what you're saying. But you spoke about the Bhagavad Gita. You spoke about Mahabharata, something that I really, and especially the Mahabharata in the new form that they put on Hotstar, Disney Hotstar, that they've put it on, is something that I've watched multitude of times. And one of the things that even I personally have grappled with is that, the concept of changing the world versus changing oneself. The scriptures say that you should change oneself, and here motivational, because here people are out there trying to change the world. Isn't there a dichotomy in the two? Isn't one different from the other? And can one achieve both together?
Yes, definitely, because as you know that the world population, as you know, Rishabh, from 1800 it was only 1 billion, and now we are touching almost 7.7 billion in 2019. And if you see the time period it took 7 centuries for the population to double from 0.25 billion way back in 800 AD till it came to zero point 0.5 billion in 1550 AD.
Hmm.
And that is how slowly the world transformed and changed in terms of numbers. But the fastest doubling of the population happened right between 1950 and 1987, and from 2.5 billion we went to 5 billion in just under 37 years. And therefore the world is changing so fast. But the problem is, along with the changing world, people's attention span is going down hugely since the internet generation. And Microsoft did a study that between 2012 and 2017, the human attention span came down from 12 seconds to 8 seconds. And it's funny that even goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. So we have become more distracted than that. And so this is a very huge issue we are facing, that the world is changing very fast, and at the same time we are not able to focus and concentrate on understanding who we are and what we are and how we can keep up with that change. And therefore it's very important for us to analyze and understand our own identity, because Arjuna's confusion happened because of the identity crisis. So today one of the biggest challenges the youth is facing is the crisis in identity. And self reflection and meditation helps you understand, fix your own identity. And once you are fully aware of who you are and what you are and why you are, then the purpose of your existence, then you can make a much better difference in others' lives. So I think, that's where the wisdom scriptures are coming from. They are helping you realize and understand your own self first. Then you can actually create a transformation in others' lives.
Fair. I just wanted to. I'm not going to go into the goldfish memory. I'm not going to go into that whether 9 seconds is correct, is not correct, in the sense that whether getting into the technicalities of things like that. The larger picture that I wanted to ask you is, you said that first you need to improve yourself and then you go out there and you improve other people. But sir, very humbly, I want to ask you this: is there are people also like Nityananda, who's now gone ahead and established a nation, and it is called Kalidasa. And there are also godmen like this all across. How does a young person, how are we able to distinguish the right from the wrong?
Yeah. See, there are certain principles, there are certain good institutions which represents those principles. And then there are certain other institutions which may not be representing the right principles. So for example, marriage is a noble institution, right? But at the same time, we also find that in today's context, Luxembourg has a divorce rate of 87%. Spain has a divorce rate of 65%. France has a divorce rate of 55%. Russia has a divorce rate of 51%. Global divorce rate is 44%. US has 46%. India has the lowest divorce rate at 1%. But although there are divorces happening, but still, marriage as an institution is still regarded as sacred, and people are getting married, and things are going on. Similarly with road accidents, similarly with hospitals, and similarly with any other area. What to speak of deaths due to food poisoning? That doesn't stop people from consuming food. So therefore, if you look at the principles part, typically in the Vedic tradition, temples were known as mandir. Mandir means hospital for the mind. So just like you go to the hospital, and especially nowadays there is such a crisis and in getting a hospital bed. So to treat your body, you go to a hospital and you are treated with a medicine. To treat the mind, you had what we know as mandir. It's a hospital for the mind. And those who are devotees there, who are giving the treatment, they are the actual doctors, and the medicine was known as the mantra. So manasa trayate iti mantra, that which releases the mind of the anxieties and the stresses and insecurities. That was known as mantra. So typically, if you focus on the principle as such, just like the society needs physical health, the society also needs mental health and spiritual health. And this holistic concept of health is what we are concerned about. And that will always continue, irrespective of various individual cases which may crop up now and then.
Great, sir. All of this sounds great, but all of this sounds very good. But one of the things is we are Instagram generation. आपने जैसे बताया that that's for us the attention time span is decreasing. That part of it I completely agree. In that you've also spoken in your book about instruments should be humble, and that you should technically have you should be modest per se. But we live in the Kali Yuga, so to say. I was born a Jain, so I've realized and I've learned a little bit saying that we're in the Kali Yuga. So when we have role models who are essentially not humble, so to say, the cricket team captains remove their coaches these days. Government leaders are holding rallies and telling people to wear masks. There are big festivals that are being organized, and we're told saying that please stay at home. These are our role models today, sir. The 21st century role models are these. How do you have you write about this saying that there should be humility, the instrument should be humble, but when the environment which dictates who you are at the end of the day is also is so difficult to navigate per se, how does a young person make the right choice? Because the role models around us are 9 out of 10 are very different from what used to be what is in the Bhagavad Gita and all of these scriptures, so to say.
Yeah, thank you for asking this. I'm reminded of a beautiful story by Abdul Kalam ji in his book, when he mentions that in July 1979, when he was launching one of the satellites, and at that time many people were saying delay the launch, but he said no, we must go ahead with the launch. And then when they launched it, then that satellite actually fell into the Bay of Bengal. It failed, and there was a press conference, and he was very nervous to face the press. And at that time the director of ISRO, Dr. Satish Dhawan, he went and faced the press and took responsibility for that fiasco. And then a couple of months later, when this was launched again, it was successful. And when this launch was successful, then Dr. Dhawan told Dr. Abdul Kalam that you go and you face the press. And he mentions in that that he got a great example of leadership, because when the failure occurred, the leader owned it up, and when the success came, he gave credit to the team. And he saw an example of integrity in his personal life and professional conduct. And therefore, yes, all of us have experienced negativities in various ways, but I would like to also emphasize that instruments need not always be famous to be influential. They need to be authentic, sincere, and accessible. And if you take the example that one of the greatest influencers in our life when we are born are not the social media influencers, but our mothers. And the child gets influenced by the mother, not because she's famous and has so many followers, but because she is authentic in her desire, she's sincere in her effort, she's accessible and available. And I would say that the example of King Ashoka is very beautiful, because King Ashoka was such an influential, powerful king. He demolished the entire kingdom of Kalinga. He was right at the outskirts of Jagannath Puri, in the bridge which is known as the Atharanala nearby. On top of the hill he went, and he just saw rivers of blood flowing by, and he felt so powerful and proud of his entire demolition of the Kalinga Empire. And as he saw just huge hordes of corpses lying, suddenly from the corner of his eye he saw one very simple looking monk come with a bucket of water and start picking up people who were half dead or were about to die and give them water gently. And this monk did not speak anything. He just gave water. He would test if someone is still alive, and he would give them water. That one small incident, an act, which is in one sense, a very simple act. Pani pilana, jal dena. It's not, something humongous. But that small act done with the right attitude, with the right intention, at the right time, in front of a person who was at that time ready to be influenced, had such an impact that immediately at that moment Ashoka started reeling, and he thought, I am trying to take away others' lives, and he is trying to give others life. And what an amazing consciousness that is. He immediately went to him and decided to become a Buddhist. And, as they say, the rest is history. So therefore, I would say that each one of us have the power to create an impact and influence. And therefore, each and every youth, I would inspire them and encourage them to follow the path of dharma, follow the path of righteousness. And as they say, dharmo rakshati rakshitah, that ultimately the path of dharma protects those who follow that path. And Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, nahi kalyanakrit kaschit durgatim tat gacchati. Ultimately, one will remain protected when they go on this path. So, I refuse to be consumed by the skepticism and the negativity which may be surrounding, because ultimately we are in the path to spread positivity and authentic positivity based on wisdom and our ancient tradition.
Authentic positivity based on a wisdom and ancient tradition, with Krishna, who should be the center of your life, and the consciousness that you speak of. That is what ISKCON is. At least that's what my understanding from Gaur Gopal Prabhuji and from all of the other wonderful people in the temples that I've visited. But sir, let me ask you this also. There's a growing generation of young people whom I interact with and who I meet often, who say that we don't believe in the concept of God. Now, we don't believe in the concept of religion. We believe that in ourselves only there is God. And to a certain extent, I believe them. When they say that, that's, and in the Bhagavad Gita also, Krishna says, मैं ही परमात्मा हूँ, मैं ही सब कुछ हूँ, मैं ही कुछ नहीं. And then I don't remember the entire phrase per se, but basically from what I roughly understand, he says the same thing, that, and in each one of us, there is God per se. So a lot of people either don't believe in a particular religion. They don't say that, we believe in Jesus or Allah or Krishna. And very many don't believe entirely in the concept of God. By that definition, you've written in your book saying that Bhakti Yoga should be something that should, that everyone should follow. By that same logic, shouldn't Karma Yoga take precedence over Bhakti Yoga?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, Rishabh, and I really like the way you have presented this, because ultimately yoga means to connect.
Correct.
And the principle of connection is extremely important. And the whole idea of yoga means that we are trying to connect with a certain purpose. So basically, yoga has 4 elements: action, knowledge, meditation, and devotion. So when the primary focus is action, we call it Karma Yoga. When the primary focus is knowledge, then we call it Jnana Yoga. When the primary focus and the sense of achievement is in acquiring perfection, it is called Ashtanga Yoga or meditation. And when the primary focus is on devotion, it is known as Bhakti Yoga. So therefore, in today's day and age, as you have rightly said, that the whole world is action oriented. And the Indian youth is being educated in so many different ways. And I come from IIT, and as you know that in India currently 27 crore students are in the school system, and 3 crores are in the college system. And I also call IIT as not just Indian Institute of Technology, but what I connected in terms of IIT in ISKCON is inspirational Indian teachings, the various texts of Ramayana, Mahabharata, etc. So one interesting thing is that in India, although there are such a large number of people in the school system, but many of you are not aware that only 12% of the students from the first to the 12th standard, they actually enter into college. That means if 100 people enter into first standard in India, you know, only 12 people will enter there in the college system. So actually, what I realized was, as a country, it's very important for us to work on consistency and reliability of our system, which should not just be focused only on education but also on values and culture, because in our traditional wisdom there is the whole concept of courage and consistency, which gives confidence. There is so much of detailed understanding of tolerance, and there is understanding of how to make incremental progress by following in the footsteps of people like Lord Rama and others. So actually speaking, since 1947, India has not produced any Nobel laureates in science, whereas US has already produced 100 Nobel laureates, and we have only total 26 Olympic medals since independence, whereas China in the 2008 games alone produced more than 100 medals. But there is one area where India more than China and US together, and that is 15 lakh engineers we are producing every year. And with so many engineers which we are producing, but the question is, are they being employable? And this is one of the biggest challenges. And I would suggest, actually, even in terms of the current tech revolution, there are two very important moments in history. One was February the 2nd, 1835, when Macaulay gave a speech in the British Parliament, and he mentioned that how we have to teach Indians the English. And then later, on October 4th, 1957, the Sputnik was launched. And as soon as Sputnik was launched by Russia, America completely changed their immigration policy. And they started searching for the best engineers, doctors, and the best intellectual talent across the world to come. But whatever Macaulay had done by creating English as a language in India, that had a major impact, because Indians could naturally connect more with America than with Russia, although the diplomatic partner of India at that time was Russia, but still America became the natural choice because of the language. And so as a result, so many people have emigrated. And as you know that currently 27 million Indians are in America, and many of what we are currently experiencing through Instagram, through Facebook, through Google, through all of these, a lot of contribution has been done by people from India who have been at the very top end teams of these tech revolutions. And I would say that before India started exporting the tech talent, India, its original talent is in its spiritual wisdom, and that wisdom which helps you cope and deal with pain, because as you know, pleasure is a divider, but pain is a unifier. And the Ramayana and the Mahabharata teach that some people need more focus, other people need to broaden their perspective, some people need to try harder, other people need to stress less, some people need to care more, others need to let it go. And therefore, Ramayana and Mahabharata is speaking all about the best choices tend to provide exponential returns. And therefore, we have to understand our lives in perspective of such wisdom texts. And then our entire education would become complete, because education comes from the Latin word educare, which means to bring out that which is within. And therefore, if we add that element of adding the values and culture to our Indian youth, I think it will be a comprehensive education. That's my strong belief.
We need a comprehensive education, and I don't disagree with you on that, because I think in the worldly sense of accomplishment, we have been taught that we need to finish first in life, and finishing second is not something that is acceptable. And I think much of your book talks otherwise, and much of the scriptures also talk otherwise, per se, from the little understanding that I have. But sir, let me ask you this question. I have nothing against mandirs and masjids and so on and so forth. And I think, like you said, the mandir, it's there to train the mind. But at the end of the day, we've got 2 2 million temples in our country, about 300,000 mosques in our country, about 1.5, we've got 1.1 lakh 50,000 churches. And against this, we have only 1.5 million education institutions. If you look at the Padmanabhan Swami temple, you look at the Tirupati Balaji temple, and all of these temples put together, the top 100 temples, you get a donation of about 100 lakh crore per year in all of this. But the school education budget is only 38,000 crore. As a country, you said that we are spiritually, we are a spiritual superpower, so to say, or we are spiritual unifier, so to say. But at the end of the day, if education has to begin, of whether it is in terms of the spiritual sense or anything else, don't you think as a country we should be looking at building schools that give out the right kind of education, vis-a-vis wasting money on Ram Mandir yahi banega ya masjid yahi banega?
Well, thank you for asking that question. First of all, I would say that, so many elections are fought, and religion is brought into the picture, and discussions are there. It would be nice to have a ministry also which deals with spirituality and religion to begin with, because that's when you can actually start looking at making proper policies in that direction. So I think that would be my first take on this, because practically, if you look at the both Christian world and the Islamic world, there is a lot of state support and state integration along with what is happening in society. And you're right that the very fact that all of these contributions to these temples show how closely integrated they are to people's hearts and people's lives. So yeah, so as far as the education is concerned, right now, one of the biggest challenges with education is a policy paralysis, and a paralysis with respect to reaching out in the rural India. Because right now I'm working with the Govardhan Eco Village in Palghar, and I've seen the situation over the last 10 years. Rishabh, I must tell you that, almost 70% of India, which is in the rural spaces, it's a different world altogether. And those in the cities want to remain in the cities, and those in the villages, they aspire to go to the cities because all the images they are getting on WhatsApp and Facebook and this and that is in that direction. So currently ISKCON is giving food in thousands of schools across India. We are running 77 kitchens, and we do this midday meals, 3 million meals a day. So some of the schools we have gone to, and practically it's very pathetic to see the situation where practically no teacher is available, and there is no attention being given to who is being taught what. So I would say that the budgets are there, the policies are there, and if you see the outlays, they are also there. And if you actually come into the rural space and see that in 1947 we got independence, and today we are in 2021. And if agriculture and rural development and all of education had got all of these budgets outlaid, where has it all gone? Wo kahan gaya? And why is it not reflecting in actual reality is a major question. And then you look at the corruption index, and India is 86 in a list of 200 in the corruption index also. So maybe there is a connection there, and there is a relationship there. But the fact of the matter is that education is going to carry the key as far as future is concerned. And the youth, especially in the cities, I really appreciated Mr. Ajay Piramal's initiative in Baggad, which is near Jaipur, where he has created the Piramal School of Leadership. That's a very interesting model where they go around selecting students from across different campuses, and they train them for an year in their School of Leadership. And that training is to help that student go and participate with a village school principal and give him support and give him some kind of encouragement and helping to build capacity there. And in this way, gradually they have handheld several schools in rural spaces and gradually building capacity. So I would say that my message to the youth who is tuned in today, and to all of your members of the organization, is that the future of India lies in these three elements collaborating. The government, that means the bureaucracy, the corporates, and the Swayam Sevaks. You can call it the volunteers, you can call it the NGOs, you can call it, self-inspired, whatever name you want to give it. But when these three come together, then I see a very bright future for India, because I see that even based on my experience in the work in the Palghar district over the last 10 years, I saw that you need three things to change rural India for sure. And first is inspiration, second is integrity, and the third is intelligence. So when there is a harmony between integrity, intelligence, and inspiration, then you gradually start seeing change and transformation. And it is very much possible with the spirit which we see in young India today, with 700 million youth population. I think we have a bright future.
I'm so glad to hear that. I was wondering, you said there are three very important pillars in this. I was like, when will youth come? But then everybody's working towards young people, so then that's fantastic. But sometimes I also feel that youth is not taken as a stakeholder, but there are things that are created for us, like our examinations. In 10th and 12th examinations we had, and nobody asked us saying whether we wanted the examination, just did. But let me take you to a very interesting part of your book, which I would want to tell all the viewers, and we're sending this conversation across as well. So you write about palace or guest house, and this I've had a conversation with many of the advisors of the organization, and I've always asked them, saying, how do you have detachment when you are in a world where your success is measured by the materialistic things that you have in and around you? Nobody who's living in a hut, if somebody was living in a hut, it would be very difficult to believe that that person is very successful according to the worldly sense of measurement. Now, how is one going to detach oneself from this worldly measurement, and also how does one detach oneself whilst living in the world? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to give up everything. At the same point in time, you are supposed to give up everything. So that's like it's again like an oxymoron. How does that happen? How can one achieve?
Yeah. Thank you so much for asking. So I would say that first of all, my message to the youth who's connected online today is four things. First, focus intensely on whatever you're working upon, work diligently. And third is very important for you, which is relax purposefully, because many times people are so obsessed to be online all the time that they forget relaxing. And fourth is sleep peacefully. So Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, yuktahara viharasya yukta cheshtasya karmasu yukta swapnava bodhasya yoga bhavati dukkha. That first of all, you have balance and harmony in your own perspective, in your own life, the way you approach life. And then second is you focus on commitment, because commitment to the process will define the progress. So the choice of your attention will decide your disposition, and we have to eliminate the unnecessary, and then only that will be a necessary step for contentment and satisfaction. And therefore the Bhagavad Gita does not say ki aap ghar ko chodo, but it says dharm ko jodo. So you connect yourself to the proper duties, to the proper path, to the proper perspective. And actually this principle of Bhagavad Gita is very important, because Arjuna wanted to quit. Arjuna said to Krishna, I want to become a beggar. I want to become non-violent. Please allow me to be non-violent. And Krishna looked at Arjuna and he said, Arjun, what non-violence are you talking about? As soon as two people have a relationship, one person is trying to control the other person using his ego. And actually, as soon as there is an ego-based relationship where you're trying to control the other person, then automatically violence has begun. And therefore, we find that the world is filled with instances of people who are closest to each other, who have the potential and the capacity to give each other the maximum pleasure. They'll end up giving each other the maximum pain. And therefore, it's so important for us to realize the context of detachment the way Krishna meant it for Arjuna, where he said that you constantly fight on this battle while thinking of me, just like a person who is a bank employee may be counting millions of dollars every single day as he sees the money coming in, but he does not have access to any of that money because he's simply a trustee, an employee on behalf of the bank who's making sure that the right people get that money when they need it. So in that sense, the person who's a bank employee cannot come back to his wife in the evening and say, you know what, we made a few $1 million today, but the wife says, oh really? Actually the bank made, but he was simply an instrument. So in that sense, the main detachment is the detachment of the mamatva, of the proprietorship, of the feeling that I am the controller, I am the proprietor, and I am the enjoyer. So that is what Bhagavad Gita focuses on, and it's just like the coconut. When the coconut dries, then you can hear the white part of the coconut which is separated within, So we have to be in the world, but be detached from the world in terms of trying to be the enjoyer and the proprietor. So that's the idea of Bhagavad Gita's detachment.
So basically, one should not focus on the I. Once you remove the I, then automatically the happiness starts.
Yes.
In a way. But let me take you to one of the let me take you to one of the final questions that I have is, at the organization, we believe in uniting the world by spreading the idea of India amongst tomorrow's leaders today, by sensitizing them to this. One of the fundamental things about India, that little bit that I understand, and from the advice that I seek, the counsel that I've been given, is that meditation, Rishabh, for everyone is very important. But first you start with yourself, because it's very important that you meditate. And this of course, I've been trying to instill as a practice amongst a lot of young people. But when people think of meditation and yoga, the first thought is Baba Ramdev. And then a lot of urban young people say, Rishabh, this is not that nice. And then we suddenly see Jennifer Lopez doing the same thing in the United States of America, and everybody's quite enamored and said, so actually this is very interesting, but why don't we get her to do it? This the question that I want to ask is, why is it so important? What's the emphasis on meditation? Why do all worldly successful people, and even otherwise those who are trying to guide people on the right path, keep mentioning, saying, please meditate and try to start as early and as young as possible?
Yeah, see, meditation is a name given to a set of techniques for accessing your inner peace. So meditation allows you to access a naturally occurring state of rest which we have while remaining alert and awake. So, the whole meditation idea is basically two things. What you meditate on, what do you meditate upon? And number two is how you pay attention. So the whole idea is to inspire the attention so that we can remain absorbed. And the idea is that meditation using our senses as the medium is known as Karma Yoga. Meditation using our mind as a medium is known as Jnana Yoga. Meditation using our intelligence is known as Ashtanga Yoga. And meditation using our soul as such is known as Bhakti Yoga. And that's basically the idea. And as you have rightly said, that, when you meditate, you are able to actually interpret reality better because you are able to see things more clearly. For example, if there is a rose, if that piece of rose I see through a microscope, it appears very huge. And if I look at the rose with a set of binoculars, which makes it seem very far, then also the magnification changes. So we need the right kind of magnification, the right kind of lens to look at different things. So you can't be using a microbial microscope for seeing something which is a beautiful object in your daily life. So therefore, what meditation does is it helps leaders interpret reality better. And when they are able to interpret more reliably based on authentic intention, based on actual wisdom, based on their astute intelligence and appropriate maturity, then they are able to take the followers to the next level, and they are able to actually experience bravery. So the concept of bravery as per Ramayana and Mahabharata is not someone who takes a sword and takes, a bow and arrow and starts shooting, but one who does not give up hope even in the most hopeless circumstances. So the authentic meditation experts, they realize that the greatest danger in human life is not just destruction of the body, but it is the distraction of the mind also. So those who are authentic meditators give as much importance to the distraction of the mind as the medical practitioners do to the destruction of the body. And therefore one needs to be focused and absorbed even in the midst of the greatest crisis. And it is described that in the Bhagavad Gita, that based on the kind of thoughts at the moment of death, our future is also defined. And therefore, we have to strengthen our character muscles by exercising gratitude, by exercising tolerance, by exercising forgiveness and compassion. And these are natural byproducts of authentic practice of meditation. And the world will be, benefiting a lot when people's hearts are transformed from greed and anger and lust to forgiveness, gratitude, and compassion. So these are some thoughts for you and your beautiful team of volunteers to meditate upon.
I think there are excellent thoughts to meditate upon, and you, like you rightly said, it's also very important what you meditate upon. I'm currently meditating upon. I'm trying to meditate upon the pizza that is just arrived. Therefore, struggle to the attention and the pizza, but then again, it's very important to focus on the right things. Let me ask you the final question. What is the first thought? Gaurangji, what is the first thought that comes to your mind when I say the following words? When I say spirituality, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? The first thought, the first word.
Harmony.
Harmony. Verbal asturity. What's the first thought?
Eloquence.
Mindfulness.
Absorption.
Food.
Mercy. Prasad.
He's like praying to the divine. Give him good food today, at least. So, when I say vacation, is there ever vacation? When the first thought comes? When?
Rejuvenation.
Rejuvenation. All right. India.
Unity and diversity.
Krishna.
All attractive.
The art of resilience.
Bounce back.
And youth.
Curious.
Curious. There's one thing for sure, we're very curious. We're very about what to do, what not to do, because going around. And when you meet an engineer who's as factual and also has so much of an understanding, and in times such as these, which is the pandemic, it's only, we're very, very grateful that you've actually taken out time in order to tell us a little more about the art of resilience, because I quite honestly, flipping through the book and going through it, I've picked up a few things which I hope I can implement in real life. So to all the wonderful people who are watching this, I really implore you that you spent a Sunday evening choosing this over the IPL, which speaks volumes, but also going and reading this book, because I think it will teach you very many things that just this conversation has thrown light upon. It's been a pleasure and an absolute honor to be this with you. Like I said, I rarely meet an engineer who knows so much in terms of statistics. Always the engineers are about more concepts and less statistics. Your concepts, statistics, and also spirituality, all three together. So it's been a delight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rishabh. Best wishes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.